Hello, and welcome to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast with your hosts, Brent Aiken, David Pruitt, and Russell Martin. This podcast is all about equipping, encouraging, and inspiring youth pastors weekly with topics that are brought to the table by youth pastors from all over the world. And now, here's your host for this week, Brent Aiken. Hey, and welcome to the podcast. If this is your first time listening to us, we want to welcome you and invite you over to our website, studentministryconversations.org, where you can find all of our previous episodes, show notes, and blog articles. Our goal is that you are inspired, encouraged, and the things that you hear on this podcast can equip you to be a better student pastor for the church that you're serving in. Now, today we are sitting down with Collin Little. And Collin, I don't want to steal your thunder, so why don't we just start off with telling a little bit more about you? Where are you? Where do you serve as at a church? And what's your heart?
All right. Well, we're down in Florence, Alabama. Been served the last 8 years in full-time ministry. Now we are traveling and doing that kind of ministry, fill in, helping student ministries, helping churches, whether it's transition or whether it's actually, hey, we need a vacation or a fill-in. Or last January, we actually had a pastor passed away, or a preacher, pastor, whatever word we use. He passed away suddenly, so they needed somebody to help them during that time. They were finding another one. So we've been kind of leaning towards that and just helping churches in that capacity after we stepped out of full-time ministry last July. So
that's awesome. And so you say so you're married?
Yeah, we've been married come 9 years come September. We've been together 8 years come like this last April. So God bless me with a really great partner that she's probably like, oh, you need a hush or something, you know?
Hey, and it tends to work out that way. They help out a lot. So that's awesome. So that could be a topic in and of itself, though, the whole like kind of ministering for churches that are in transitions and stuff like that. And that might be a conversation for another day. But the topic that you wanted to talk about today was it's okay to not be okay, or basically understanding the fact that like just because you work at a church, it doesn't mean that you have to be like all put together all the time. And so can you speak into your heart for this for a minute? Why is this something that you're passionate about?
Man, I really think it goes around the saying or the idea that we don't have to put on that front or put on that mask, even as ministers, and just act like everything's okay. Because honestly, there's times where each one of us are going to be struggling with something. You know, it could have been like my wife and I are walking through infertility right now. You know, we need to lay that down in front of our leadership. Or if you're struggling with, hey, last February my mom passed away, and I was struggling with grief, still navigating those things, but it could be the loss of someone. It could be a relationship you're struggling with, or it could be, there's just so many things, you know, either life or Satan, or even, you know, we've seen so many ministers, pastors, and others take their lives because of depression, anxiety, or stress. We lost an elder in 2019 to suicide because he took the problems of the church to heart, those things like that. But the reality is it's okay to not have a good day, but it's also okay to not be okay, like you're saying, my friend.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And I think there's a lot of danger, as you mentioned, with that. There's, um, I mean, obviously, it's pretty easy to spot the stigma in churches when it comes to thinking that the pastoral staff or ministry staff or whatever you want to say is kind of like this group of perfect people that kind of just float above the church as the church does their things. And it's like that's not the case at all. And I've seen a lot of churches do this well, where they kind of are like, hey, we're going to be out front with this. Like, we are not different than you. Like, we struggle with the same struggles. We are the same people. We have the same hobbies, the same passions. We just literally want to point people to Jesus all the time. Like, that is what we want to do for our career, for our profession. And somehow or another, the stigma kind of just stays. And this stigma is a big kind of downer on the church today, because there's so many expectations that fly out about it, that really is just not healthy for anyone at the end of the day, because there's so much stuff going on. And so why do you think, I guess in your own words, why do you think there is such a stigma, or kind of such a bad rap on having mental and physical and emotional and even sometimes spiritual damage among leaders in ministry.
I kind of think because it oftentimes feels like sometimes the leadership doesn't want that to be the thing, or other people may want to be like, oh well, we don't need to have our top tier people going through these things or letting everybody know. We need to keep this on the down low or hush. So it's kind of those struggles, and it's also just like you're saying. Sometimes it's like I want to be on a level playing ground. I don't want people to feel like the inferiorities there or things like that. But true reality is the only people we know of that were ever perfect were Jesus, and that we serve a perfect God. But other than that, we're going to fall, we're going to falter, and we're going to go through things. So
Yeah, I mean it says it Paul says it pretty clearly in Romans that like we all fall short. And so I do think that that's a very very important thing to think of. And so obviously there's things that we can work on and we're going to get to that in a little bit. But I guess how do you go about addressing this? I guess from the instance in the realm of student ministry, how do you go about creating an environment that allows students to understand and grasp, and even parents and volunteers grasp this mindset that like, hey, like you're the same person as everybody else. We're all in this together kind of boat. We just have the opportunity to be leading and equipping y'all to do the same work. How do you create that environment of understanding where they don't have that stigma?
well, I mean, we all know that Jesus took 12 outsiders to change the world. So it's like the reality is we're going to take we need to just build relationships with each family or each student, and just allow that opportunity for those relationships to grow to where we're able to actually say, hey, some of them are checking in on us, or say one of those families goes through some kind of struggle, or son or daughter's going through something as well. Maybe it's those opportunities where we help them through that, but then reality is they know that we're going to be walking through some kind of valley, or we are, and they're ready to do that too. It's all about being able to fight our battles together and not really think we've got to be separated or distant, I guess. So
Yeah, no, I definitely see that and 100% agree. And the thing is I think especially when you're going into the realm of talking with students and leaders that are within your program, even the parents, is like you got to be open and transparent when you are having a bad day. Because like you can't just shut it off at the door and be like, "Hey, like this is awful but no big deal," kind of thing like that. Like I'm just going to hide it when I walk into the building, because when they see you being open and authentic and raw, that hopefully will just inspire them to do the same. Because there's going to be days, whether it's a high schooler going to school, that's like, man, today was just miserable. It seemed like everything I did, I failed. All of my tests came back today and it was all bad. I got home and my parents were mad at me for doing, I mean, like, and just the list goes on and on. We have to have this opportunity for conversation where they are open to sharing their struggles too. But in order for them to feel comfortable and welcome, we kind of have to share ours as well. And I think that's a really, really big important part. And then also parents need to understand that like that's a reality as well. Because I think that it opens up a lot of doors for for ministry moments with parents as well, when you have those opportunities for being open and authentic and raw. So, obviously we need to be painting and creating that environment where it, like you said, it's okay to not be okay. And I think that's a genuine and important part of ministry, the authenticity and like everybody being pointed to Jesus. But how, outside of obviously like working out those things within our own spiritual battles and turmoils, and like being obedient to what God has put on our hearts and our plans to work through those issues as well, because you talked about a bunch about like loss in the family and stuff like that. We have to do our own grieving and our own coping, and Jesus plays a big part in that. But how can we work also just to help ourselves realize this reality of like, hey, I don't have to be perfect? Because I think there's a lot of pastors, and like you mentioned, there's a lot of pastors and elders and just ministry leaders that literally, I mean, for lack of a better term, kill themselves over the pressure of what ministry can be if it's not done in a healthy way. And we've done a couple different podcasts over this topic of just like having this healthy mindset when it comes to ministry. But how can we work to help ourselves towards this reality of like being authentic and open?
Man, I really think it all comes into play. You know, we all know that. I mean, my wife and I are in talks with a part-time youth ministry here locally, hopefully, and going to talk with them. But our mindset is either men or women who ever lead these ministries. We're thinking, okay, youth ministry is not part-time. This thing's not part-time or whatnot, or any kind of ministry. But we have to be able to step back at times and be able to say, hey, I've got other people that are helping in this role to where we can actually develop even more. Because it'd be great one day if it's not just all about the ministry of Brent or ministry of Collin, but it's the ministry of what Jesus built with the other parents, other adult volunteers, and even other students that may have been those role models to help build that authenticity and that true, real moments. We shared that song a few years ago, "Loving My Jesus" by Casting Crowns, and it says "Showing My Scars," and that was the moment where I was just open and honest. I said, "Guys, I'm struggling and I'm breaking down, and I know y'all are walking through something too." And it's just those moments where you be real and you honestly cry or you honestly break down and say, "Hey, what are you struggling with?" Because I'm struggling with this. And it's those opportunities too where we have to somehow convince parents it's okay that your child's going through this. I want to walk through it with you. Or it's
Yeah.
okay that you're going through something. Let's walk through it together. I'm not just oftentimes, as youth ministers or youth pastors, we get overlooked because, oh, well, you're too young or you're not old enough to understand. But the reality is, we're trying to help all family units or even adults older than us or even young adults. So,
Yeah, no, and I actually read something on Facebook today that was really really good and kind of correlated around student ministry. But it was something that basically said, we have to get off of um we have to get off the mindset that youth ministry has to be a defensive game. Greg Steer posted it yesterday on Facebook. And it said the church plays way too much defense when it comes to dealing with teenagers. We rant and rave about the drugs, depression, social media, and violence that are ravaging our youth. And yes, these are critical issues that must be faced head on and dealt with. But as the church, we often forsake playing offense when it comes to youth ministry. It's not just about taking the vapes out of their hands or the smartphones out of their rooms. It's calling them to be something bigger, something better, and something biblical. We must help our teenagers grasp the glorious reality of the gospel that salvation is more than a ticket to heaven. It's a train ride through life that reveals their true identity, belonging, and purpose in Christ. We must inspire them to be used by God to change their agents on their campuses and ambassadors of Christ in their communities. We must treat teenagers in our churches not as a youth room full of apathetic narcissists waiting to be entertained, but as a missionary force waiting to be unleashed. And man, that kind of goes hand in hand with what we're talking about. The mindset of like, when we have these moments where we can be raw and authentic with them, we're not just showing them that, hey, we have problems too. It's okay. It's showing them that, hey, I'm struggling with this, but this is the direction that I'm walking. I'm walking to Jesus, join me, kind of thing like that. And I think Paul said that really, really well as well. I mean, follow me as I follow Christ. It's like I'm not anywhere near close enough to be like, y'all follow me, but like we have to get to that realm of understanding to where like, yeah, it's okay to hurt. I'm hurting too. I'm struggling too, but let's walk to Jesus together. And so very very important, and I love what you said in that. There's a lot of truth when it comes to the mindset of going and just having that mindset of um wanting to walk through it together. And I think a lot of parents appreciate that too, because parents want to see the real you just as much as the kids do. And oftentimes, when you have those real, authentic moments with students, they open up tremendously more, because they're like, oh, well, you're being real with me, so I guess I can be real with you. So, how can we recognize um, how can we work towards bettering ourselves through the process of recognizing that we're not okay? So obviously we're like, you have to make that realization of like, you're not perfect. You cannot hold that role of perfect youth pastor or perfect ministry leader as long as you're in ministry. So you've recognized that. So how do we work through that process to better ourselves in the long run?
Man, I feel like there's a certain ounce of accountability, but there's also, we don't need to get ourselves on that pedestal or hold us to such a high standard. Maybe level the ground with the other leadership you work with and be like, okay, maybe, hey, you want to hold me accountable this week, or I'll hold you accountable. Have someone else to do that, or maybe it's someone you, maybe a mentor or a friend, and it's a weekly kind of check in or every other week to be able to be like, okay, well, I'm not comparing myself, or I'm not falling into the trap that Satan wants us to have to compare myself to another ministry, or I'm not doing enough, or this or that. But maybe it's reality that, hey, leadership, let's talk together and let's say, hey, what can I do efficiently and do it well for the students, for myself, for my family, and for the families we're working with. So,
Yeah. No, and I think there's importance in that. And I think also like staff's coming to the understanding of like, hey, you need a day. Like go take a day and be with your family. Or if you're single and listening to this, go take a day and just like have a moment to yourself where you can kind of rewind and relax and recharge and all of the things that you need to do, but not just leave it at that and say, hey, I'm going to check in on you. Like you just said, that accountability is super important, especially when someone is struggling. Because a lot of people, and I'm just as guilty as anybody else, when I'm going through different scenarios, I had a bunch of family members pass a couple years ago and they were within like 8 months of each other. It was just like, all right, yeah, like that stunk, that I got to move on, kind of thing like that. And but people kept asking like, hey, like, are you really okay? Like you this has been a lot. Are you really okay? Are you really okay? And I was like, yeah, no, I'm fine. I'm fine, like kind of thing. But the more they asked, the more it allowed me to just process the mindset of like, am I okay? People keep asking me. And if people keep asking me, obviously the thing that I'm saying doesn't seem legitimate or doesn't seem realistic. So what do I need to look at internally here? And so having those accountability partners is super important because it does give you the mindset of, even if you're trying to push through and be perfect, if someone keeps asking you the same question, eventually it's going to click. And you're going to spend more time on that. So I think this is an interesting route for just a second, and I'd love to hear you talk about it for a little while. Um, Obviously you've had from doing youth ministry in a church where that was your primary goal and primary job, to doing transitional ministry, to potentially doing bivocational here in the next couple months, which we hope that works out. What is the most challenging obstacle that you have found as you have walked this personally? And I'd like to see this from a two-sided approach, what you're doing now and when you were as full-time of youth ministry that you've been.
I guess the balance, as most of us face, is like, okay, am I doing enough in our minds? Or are we not doing enough for the students versus what parents and everybody else see that we're doing enough, but yet we think we're not doing enough, is what I struggled with in full-time ministry. And then now it's like stepping back from that full-time role and the peace that God provided. It was almost like parents were like, we did so much for my students. God, all right, we sowed the seeds and God provided the baptisms further on. We've seen in the last few months now, and just over the last year, we've seen that. And then the transitional ministry that we've been doing, filling in and things, it's given us opportunities to go back to congregations we served in the area with, help them with things, or just fill in, or just get to check in on people. Like we're saying, some people have been through something, or something they're walking through, and just, I mean, we all went through COVID. We all went through those things, and meeting with the with one of those churches, I just preached this sermon. Maybe it's okay to not be okay, and went on about how we're called to be holy and set apart, as we see in 2 Peter 1, 9 and 10. But yet, it's oftentimes we lose track of that because Satan brings in all that negativity, and so we focus more on that. But then even this opportunity to be bivocational now, it was crazy because during COVID, I felt like God was setting this up, because during 2020 to the end of 2021, I was working with Publix as well, working 35, 40 hours because I'm a busybody. I could not stay at home. But it's like it almost felt like God was preparing me to transition to do something like this, because here I am now working 40 hours a week with a pest control out of the Southeast. And here we are, maybe with this opportunity to sit down with the leadership and be like, hey, we'd love to serve your church, things like that. And their expectations are, they laid a few things out, and it's not, and it's just the thing where I've told my wife, it's like, okay, I can't go into this like I've used to have that mindset. Okay, it's part time, but yet no ministry is not or is part time. But the reality is to go by their guidelines, and if there's anything we need to improve, we meet on in common ground and talk about it and move forward. So
Yeah, no, and I definitely agree. I I did have a question as far as what you said about when you were in full-time ministry, you had this feeling that I'm sure listeners listening to this episode are like, yeah, I have this all the time. But that feeling of like, man, I'm not doing enough. Like I'm not earning my paycheck. I'm not like all this stuff. Why do you think that feeling exists, and how much of a toll does that have on youth pastors that are working, especially full time, and I would honestly even say part time, because a lot of times, even with the part timers, they really feel like what they've thrown in isn't for quote unquote valuable. I mean, it doesn't feel like the bang is worth the buck, as far as that expression goes. But why do you think that is? Why do you think that we see the value in time, man, like time spent over like what we see as far as life change and planting those seeds, like you just said?
man, I think the reality is we're busy people in general, and we want to feel or do so much. And but reality is even parents and the students are so busy themselves. But it's those opportunities. Okay, besides Sunday morning worship and Sunday classes or opportunities like that, and Sunday night worships and Wednesday midweek, what are we doing for them? So it's kind of it makes me think. Okay, is it some sense of guilt, or is it some sense of integrity, or what? Because we all, I mean, we all as ministers beat ourselves up because we sometimes we don't feel like we're doing enough, but yet our parents are seeing it and they're saying, "Wow, y'all are doing a lot," things like that. So I don't know if it's guilt or what, you know.
Yeah, I definitely have had moments where that has happened too. And I had a pastor one time tell me, he was like, "Why don't you be the model of unbusyness?" And it was like, "Oh." Like, and immediately I felt guilty for even thinking that was an option. Because it was like, oh well, no, I have to like show that like I'm doing things, and I have to have things that like people can measure my success off of and all this stuff. And he's like, "Why?" He's like, "Your success, like your measurement of success is the development of the students." He was like, I don't care if you're a paper pusher." He was like, "I want to see spirit. I want to see kids change. I want to see like you investing time in their relationships, and that does not have office hours. I want to see you developing your ability to speak to students. I want to see you developing your ability to create relationships with those students, and ultimately pointing them towards Jesus." He was like, I don't care how well you can write a lesson, so to speak." He's like, "I don't care if you use curriculum." He's like, "I want you to use the time that you have effectively, but don't worry about quantity over quality." And I think a lot of times when we get into ministry, we have this idea of like ministry has to be this quantity of we have to get so much stuff done. And that's where a lot of the stress and anxiety comes from. We have 70 different activities going on over the summer, when we shut down our normal weekly activities, or we keep those weekly activities going, and then we pile 50 things on top of those weekly activities that were keeping us busy the entire school year, and we call that normal.
Yeah.
And so I think part of the thing is we have to realize that part of being okay with not being okay is staring at ourselves in a mirror and saying, am I doing too much? um because we had a guest on a couple months ago, Jerry Varner, and he said something that I'll never forget. He said, when you're planning your calendar, he said your calendar should be more like a mirror than a map. He was like, when you're looking at a calendar, he was like, I can tell your ideals, I can tell what you're focused on, and I can tell where your direction is off of seeing what is on your calendar more than what your events are and what you're planning to do. He was like, I can see your priorities and where you put your time and efforts and focus in. And it was just one of those things, like when he said that, like your calendar should be a mirror more than a map. I was like, whoa, what a short statement that has such a powerful motive when it comes to ministry. And maybe that's one of the things that we really, really have to address when we come into the realm of it's okay to not be okay, is like, maybe we don't have to do everything. Maybe we don't have to have events and opportunities for ministry every waking moment that the students are out of school, or whether it be summer or during the school year. maybe meeting once a week and being really, really intentional with the time that we have with our students is important, because
Yep.
we know that those conversations are going to come on text message and phone and social media later as well. And those are just as important. So maybe you meeting with a student for coffee is just as important as that Wednesday night that you spent 10, 12 hours planning for, or all the extra games and events and activities that you're throwing in. Maybe we just need to be more intentional about finding those moments where relationships happen and lives are changed through the gospel. And I think ultimately, when we focus on quality instead of quantity, we're going to get ourselves out of that rut of anxiety and being worried that we don't do enough, because we begin to see the quality of our ministry and we don't fret over the quantity of it not being enough. And so I rambled there for a second, but
You're
sorry.
good.
But I do think that that's important, because I think that at the end of the day, when you get down to it, a lot of the anxiety and mental health issues that a lot of pastors are facing are self-imposed. Like we put it on ourselves. Granted, yes, there is that level of perfection that a lot of church members expect or think that we are, and that is something that you do have to battle. But at the same time, like, what are you doing to actively promote a style of like, hey, I can handle what I can handle and I know where that is.
Yep.
And I think that's super important, and I think that you've said that throughout your conversation as well. And so if you could give advice to a youth pastor that is currently feels like they're under the weight of the world, but has to keep up that level of perfection, or maybe to a new youth pastor that's just now getting into the game, these can be different answers. If they are, totally fine. What would you say to them? What advice would you give?
I think it's okay to reach out to someone. It's okay to talk to someone. It's okay to even just like, I mean, just literally just, I want to sit down with coffee, or can we talk about this? Or even if you got a lead pastor role, somebody does, and or maybe another pastor, or minister or whatnot, maybe say, hey, let's just grab coffee. I need to talk to somebody. Or if they're in the same boat, just normalize conversations, because it's gonna be those things where you're walking through something and you may want to just shut down and not say anything, but yet it's better to talk about it and walk through it than it is to keep it uh, coddled inside of us. So,
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I great advice, great insight on and hopefully something that's heard, because I would say out of all of our episodes, this is one that probably has the most of like, oh, this is me factor. Like I fell victim to this, because it's a worldwide pandemic of busyness. We're in a culture so much, regardless of where we live, where like if you're not busy, you're not successful. And busyness leads to stress and anxiety and depression and all those other things, to where if you don't learn how to manage these things, you're not going to ever reach a place of mental health. So we've had I've mentioned a couple different episodes that we've talked to on this. If you're listening to this episode, I will have all of those episodes in the show notes where you can find them as well, or you can just go on Spotify or Apple or whatever you listen to us on, and you can look up those episodes yourself. But we've done a lot of conversations about this because we think it's a really, really important conversation to have. And it's one that plagues a lot of us. And so super, super important. Do you have any last things to say to kind of wrap up and cover what you have said so far?
I think mentally, spiritually, and physically, we run into the factor of when we're going through these stressful situations. Some of us stress eat. That's what I do sometimes. We turn into that. And this is just a shameless plug, but we're doing a youth pastor fitness support group. If you need help losing some weight, we've got a group on Facebook for that. Or if you need just some motivation, or if you've done this, you've walked through a valley of some sort and you want to encourage some more people, that's what we're doing in that group as well. We're just trying to encourage and motivate through that. But real reality is we turn stress into eating, we turn stress into derogatory thoughts to ourselves, we turn into anxiety and depression. But God wants us to know that He knows our thoughts, He knows our hearts, and He knows our ways, and He wants us to be able to transform it. Because in Ephesians 2:10, we're His masterpiece. We His workmanship to begin with, but we're a masterpiece by Him, and we need to allow ourselves to be seen as a masterpiece or as a work in progress every day. And every day is I love Bear Bryant's thing. I don't have the whole quote, but he says each day is a new day. I will choose how I'll use it, whether for good or for evil. And then the rest of it you can find on Google, but I can never remember the rest. So, but it's a powerful
Yeah.
thing. So,
That's awesome. And I think it also goes into the expression of like Rome wasn't built in a day and Rome wasn't built by one person. And so if you are a work of Christ that is being built over time, it's going to take more than one day and it's going to take more than you. And so with that, be very, very mindful if you're listening to this. Please reach out to people. You can always message us on this podcast. We'd love to talk to you. You can reach out to Collin, join his Facebook group. We'll have all the details for that in the show notes as well, if you want to get involved in that. And if either of these aren't, get on Facebook. There are 100,000 different groups of youth pastors that are like just trying to create and build community. There's the big ones like Download Youth Ministry and stuff you can use, youthmin.org, all those. But then there's others that are just small and regionally connected. We've done an episode with Travis Deans from the National Network of Youth Ministries. You can go to their website, which will also be in the show notes, and you can literally connect with youth pastors in your region. At very least, go to the church that's next to you and be like, hey, I don't know if I've met the youth pastor there. I'm going to go meet them, or find out who the youth pastors are in your community and start that opportunity for growth together, and be the light for change in that matter. But I do think it's important, like Collin has said time and time again in this, you are not alone. You have to reach out to people. And if you are not doing that, then the first step has to be that. Because accountability and having that network and that community of people around you is, if not it's the most important thing outside of Jesus. I mean, obviously the relationship with Jesus comes first and foremost, and we want you to stay encouraged and stay plugged into what God has for you. But having and surrounding yourself with like-minded people that are also going to push you to be better in everything you do for the sake of what Jesus has called you to do is super, super important. So lastly, how can people connect with you if they would like to reach out on social media or email or anything like that?
we're on Facebook. I've got a follow page, Collin Little 26. Collin A. Little is our Facebook. We're on TikTok. We're the Little Bunch. My wife and I have it on there. We've got about 5K followers. We're tending to do that motivational and things through there. And then I'm on Instagram. I use that Collin Little 26 too. So we're working on YouTube. We're working on other avenues, but I'm a little bit of a chicken right now when it comes to YouTube and streaming. So,
hey, it works. And the thing is once you do it, you get better at it and you keep going. I go back and listen to the first couple episodes of this podcast every now and then, and I'm like, man, I was a completely different person. It's amazing what happens when you just start developing the craft of what you do, and practicing it. And so, man, good luck with all your efforts. If you're interested in anything that Collin has said or done with his Facebook group for fitness and weight loss or anything like that, definitely check those out. Like I said, they'll be in the show notes on our website, studentministryconversations.org. Collin's episode will be posted. If you're listening to this after it's been posted and it's not on that front page, you can click the search icon at the top of our website and just type in Collin Little, and it'll bring you directly to his episode where you can find all the links and details for all of this. But Collin, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for reaching out. Collin is one of the many people now that have, we say this every single episode, where if you want to be on the show, we want you on the show. Literally, we do not want to be the ones talking. We want to be the ones listening. And we have had many, many great and insightful voices when it comes to ministry on this show. And that's kind of the bread and butter of what we do. We believe that every youth pastor has a voice and everybody has something that we can learn from. And so if you're listening to this and you want to be on the show, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to us on social media at Talk Student Men, or you can send us an email, podcast@studentministryconversations.org. And we would love to set up a time for you to come on the show. But also, if you're a frequent listener and you don't want to be on the show, all we ask is that you share episodes to get us out to the greater student ministry audience. You can tag this episode if it stood out to you, or any of the other episodes we have. Tag us in that post though at Talk Student Men, as we'd love to be a part of the conversation that you have with the people that you follow and are with on social media. Until then, Collin, it has been fantastic. Thank you, sir, for taking time out of your workday, parking in a parking lot, and man, taking a moment just to share your wisdom and insight. So much fun, great conversation that needs to be heard time and time and time again. And we're excited for listeners to hear this one. But until next time, if you're listening to us, we hope you have a great week. We hope that you are encouraged, equipped, and inspired. And we will see you next week.